The television studio lights blazed down mercilessly as CBS host Richard Sterling leaned forward across his desk, his eyes gleaming with the predatory intensity of a prosecutor who believed he had cornered a dangerous criminal. "So, Mr. Marley," Sterling said, his voice dripping with barely concealed disgust, "how do you justify promoting illegal drug use to millions of impressionable young Americans?" It was March 15, 1979, and Bob Marley had agreed to appear on Sterling's primetime news show, America Tonight, to discuss his music and message of unity. But Sterling had other plans. He intended to expose Bob as what he called a dangerous influence corrupting American youth with drug propaganda disguised as music. What neither Sterling nor the 12 million viewers watching live could have anticipated was that this hostile interview would transform into one of the most powerful demonstrations of grace under pressure in television history, as Bob's compassionate response to Sterling's personal crisis would change not just one bitter journalist's heart, but revolutionize how the media approached interviews with artists and activists. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music, history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. CBS Studios, New York City, 8:30 p.m. EST. America Tonight was one of the most watched news programs on television, known for Sterling's aggressive interview style that had made him famous for exposing the truth behind the headlines. At 42 years old, Richard Sterling had built his career on confrontational journalism, taking down politicians, celebrities, and cultural figures he deemed threats to traditional American values. Sterling had been planning this interview with Bob Marley for weeks, studying everything he could find about Rastafari culture, reggae music, and what he saw as the dangerous influence of marijuana advocacy in popular music. In Sterling's view, Bob Marley represented everything wrong with the counterculture movement, a foreign musician promoting drug use, racial mixing, and resistance to authority among American teenagers. Bob arrived at the studio that evening expecting a standard interview about his music and upcoming tour dates. He wore his characteristic casual attire, clean jeans, a button-down shirt, and a leather jacket, and carried himself with the quiet dignity that had become his trademark. His manager, Chris Blackwell, had warned him that Sterling might ask challenging questions, but Bob believed that honest conversation could bridge any divide. The show's opening segment had gone normally, with Sterling introducing Bob as controversial reggae musician Bob Marley and providing basic background information. But as soon as they went live for the main interview segment, Sterling's tone shifted dramatically. "Mr. Marley," Sterling began, his voice taking on a prosecutorial edge, "your music contains frequent references to marijuana use, which is illegal in the United States. How do you justify using your platform to encourage drug use among young people?" Bob had faced this question many times and responded with his usual thoughtful approach. "Mr. Sterling, Rastafari use natural herbs for meditation and spiritual connection, not for recreational drug use. We believe that certain plants were put here by the Creator for healing purposes. But you can't deny that your songs explicitly promote smoking marijuana," Sterling pressed aggressively. "Young people hear your music and think drug use is not only acceptable, but spiritually beneficial. Don't you feel any responsibility for the lives you're potentially destroying?" Bob remained calm, despite the hostile tone. "I feel responsibility for spreading love, unity, and spiritual awareness. If young people are drawn to herbs, they should educate themselves about traditional use versus abuse. My music promotes consciousness, not unconsciousness." Sterling wasn't satisfied with this measured response. He had prepared more aggressive tactics. "Let's talk about your song, Exodus. You're essentially telling people to abandon their countries, to reject the societies that have given them opportunities. Isn't this just anti-American propaganda wrapped in a catchy melody?" "Exodus is about spiritual journey," Bob explained patiently. "Sometimes people need to move, physically or mentally, away from systems that oppress them. America was built by people seeking exodus from oppression. How is that anti-American?" Sterling's face flushed with anger as his carefully planned attacks were being deflected by Bob's thoughtful responses. The interview was not going as Sterling had scripted it. Instead of exposing Bob as a dangerous influence, he was making Sterling look like a bully attacking a thoughtful, articulate guest. "Mr. Marley," Sterling said, his voice rising, You come from Jamaica, a country plagued by poverty and violence, and yet you presume to tell Americans how to live their lives. Why should anyone listen to political advice from someone whose own country is falling apart? This attack crossed a line from questioning Bob's music to insulting his homeland and heritage. The studio audience, which had been quietly watching, began murmuring with discomfort. Even the camera operators exchanged glances, recognizing that Sterling was behaving unprofessionally. Bob's response was measured but firm. "Mr. Sterling, Jamaica has challenges, like every nation. But Jamaica also gave the world reggae music, which has brought joy and unity to millions of people. Every country has something to offer. What matters is whether we choose to focus on building up or tearing down." Sterling realized he was losing control of the interview. His attacks were making him look small, while Bob appeared increasingly wise and dignified. In desperation, he made his most vicious attack yet. "Let's be honest about what you really represent," Sterling sneered. "You're a drug-promoting radical who uses music to spread anti-establishment propaganda. You encourage young people to drop out of society, use illegal substances, and reject the values that built this country. How many young lives have been ruined because they followed your example?" The studio fell completely silent. Sterling had gone beyond tough questioning into personal character assassination, and everyone present could feel the cruelty of his words. Bob looked at Sterling with deep sadness rather than anger. "Mr. Sterling, I can see that you're carrying a lot of pain. Your words come from hurt, not from truth. What has happened in your life that makes you want to attack someone you don't even know?" Sterling was stunned by this response. No interview subject had ever turned the tables on him like this, looking past his aggression to see his personal pain. That's not relevant to this discussion," Sterling stammered, thrown off his rhythm. "Everything is relevant when we're talking about human beings," Bob replied gently. "You're not asking these questions because you care about young people or American values. You're attacking me because something inside you is hurting, and you think hurting others will make you feel better." Sterling's professional composure began cracking. Bob's compassionate insight had hit something deep and raw that Sterling had been trying to hide, not just from the public, but from himself. "This interview is about you, not me," Sterling said weakly, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. "No," Bob said quietly. "This interview is about both of us. Two human beings trying to understand each other. And I can see that understanding you means understanding your pain." At that moment, something unprecedented happened in television history. A commercial break was called, but instead of separating, Bob and Sterling remained seated, the cameras still rolling for the studio monitors. "Mr. Sterling," Bob said during what he thought was a private moment, "what is really troubling you? This anger you're carrying, it's not about my music or my message. What's eating at your heart?" Sterling's composure completely crumbled. On live television, in front of millions of viewers, this hardened journalist began crying. "My son," he whispered, "my 17-year-old son. He overdosed 3 weeks ago. He's been in intensive care. The doctors don't know if he'll ever recover." Bob's expression immediately shifted to deep compassion. "Oh, brother, I'm so sorry. Is he going to be all right?" "I don't know," Sterling said through tears. "He was using heroin, not marijuana, but I've been so angry at everyone who I think influenced him. Every musician, every cultural figure who I thought led him astray. I've been blaming everyone except myself for not being there when he needed me." The studio audience was witnessing something extraordinary. A bitter, hostile interviewer breaking down and revealing his deepest vulnerability to the very person he had been attacking. "Mr. Sterling," Bob said gently, "your son's addiction isn't your fault, and it's not my fault either. Addiction is a disease that comes from pain and emptiness that drugs temporarily fill. The answer isn't more anger. It's more love." "But how do I help him if he recovers?" Sterling asked desperately. "I don't know how to connect with him. I don't understand his generation, his interests, his struggles." "You start by listening," Bob replied. "The same way you could have listened to me tonight instead of attacking me. Your son probably needs to know that you love him no matter what, not that you're disappointed in his choices. Sterling looked at Bob with amazement. You're giving me parenting advice after I spent 30 minutes trying to destroy your reputation on national secret television. That's what human beings do for each other, Bob said simply. We help each other through pain, even when, especially when, that pain has made us act badly. The show's producer, watching from the control room, realized they had captured something unprecedented. Instead of returning from commercial break with the planned format, they decided to let this spontaneous conversation continue. When they returned to air, Sterling was completely transformed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the camera, his voice thick with emotion, I owe Mr. Marley and all of you an apology. I came into this interview with preconceptions and personal anger that had nothing to do with Bob Marley's music or message, and instead of responding to my hostility with more hostility, he responded with compassion and wisdom. Sterling turned to Bob. Mr. Marley, I attacked you unfairly because I'm dealing with a family crisis that has nothing to do with you. You could have defended yourself by attacking me back, but instead, you offered to help me understand how to be a better father. That shows me more about your character than any song could. Bob nodded graciously. Mr. Sterling, we all carry pain, and sometimes that pain makes us lash out at innocent people. What matters is recognizing when we've hurt someone and choosing to do better. Can you tell our viewers what your music is really about? Sterling asked. Not the assumptions and prejudices I brought to this interview, but what you actually hope to accomplish with your art. For the first time that evening, Bob smiled broadly. My music is about love, unity, and spiritual awakening. I want people to realize that despite our different backgrounds, we're all part of the same human family. When we hurt each other, we hurt ourselves. When we heal each other, we heal ourselves. The rest of the interview was completely different from what had come before. Sterling asked thoughtful questions about Bob's background, his spiritual beliefs, his hopes for his music's impact. Bob shared stories about growing up in poverty in Jamaica, about how music had saved his life, about his belief that art could bring people together across racial and cultural divides. When the interview ended, Sterling did something he had never done in his career. He left his desk, walked around to Bob's chair, and embraced him on camera. Thank you, Sterling said quietly. But the microphones picked up his words. You've taught me more in 1 hour than I've learned in 20 years of journalism. The response to the interview was immediate and overwhelming. CBS received thousands of calls from viewers who had been moved by the transformation they had witnessed. Many were calling to share their own stories of how anger and pain had made them unfairly judge others, and how Bob's example of responding to hostility with compassion had inspired them to approach their own conflicts differently.